Good morning and welcome, everyone. My name is Patricia Carbonell. I'm from REVOLVE, a media group fostering cultures of sustainability, fostering climate communications, and I'm the moderator of today's session, Advancing Climate Emergency Reporting in European Newsrooms, hosted as part of the RESIST project. RESIST project is funded by the Horizon Europe. It's a EU flagship research and innovation program within the framework of one of the missions, which is the one focusing on adaptation to climate change. And that's why we are here today. This is the mission. This overarching adaptation to climate change mission is designed to support 150 European regions and communities adapting to escalating climate risks. We're talking from severe floods, droughts, to wildfires and extreme heat events. And we all know that the impacts of climate change has been increasing over the past decades, and we are experiencing floods that have been affecting over 5.5 million people, that has been causing damages exceeding 170 billion euros. And as climate threats are intensifying, we believe that the journalists have a very important role to play, not just informing the public, but all because they are in the front lines. They are connecting communities with the information that needs to be accurate and on time. So it's very important for all actors in society to understand what's happening and to respond to this crisis timely and effectively. And that's why RESIST is helping to bring these actors together. We are a consortium of 59 partners. It has a total budget of 26.7 million, and it's expected to reach 22 million citizens. So the ambition is high to really connect with society. And that includes, of course, the media and the role to play, and of course, solutions that need to reach the market. 100 solutions during 5 years. That's this project, it's the duration. And out of these 150 regions that the climate adaptation mission is targeting, RESIST is actually working with 12 regions. We are working with 4 large demonstrator regions, which include Southwest Finland, Central Denmark, Catalonia, and Central Portugal. And those are the ones that are implementing and developing tools, tangible, real cases in those different municipalities within these regions, that then they will be applied and transferred to the other 8 regions that we have here displayed. So it's very important for us to work on real-world adaptation strategies that are available and can be replicated in other areas. So to amplify these efforts, we believe that it's very important to amplify the role of communication leaders involving journalists, so they have the tools, they have the knowledge of what's going on, what are the challenges, but also what are the solutions being deployed. So we are more aware and empowered as communities to respond to these climate risks effectively. So as part of the RESIST mission, we are engaging with citizens, businesses, policymakers, scientific community, and the media. That's all actors needed in these moments of needed resilience, so we can gather everyone's efforts urgently, and we can respond to that with, of course, accurate information that navigates the complexities of this climate crisis. And this comes in many different forms. It can be through different activities that happen on the ground with civil protection officers, with capacity building for different actors that are involved in the solutions, through nature-based solutions that are restoring natural areas or improving urban infrastructure. So we are taking into account all different methods and solutions and tools, and also using technology when needed to simulate scenarios and to adapt more effectively to that. So we are taking a very bottom-up approach, but also including all actors that could make this governance and this coordination and organization and communication effective, because this is what we are seeing that it's needed when a flood comes in very strongly with the magnitude that we are seeing with the recent floods in Spain, for example, or with the recent wildfires that we saw in central Portugal. We need a response, a cohesive response that is able to address the needs of the communities, especially the most vulnerable ones, that are usually the ones that are facing the impact of climate change. So that's why, at the end of the day, we wanted to bring this space and discussing how newsrooms, journalists, can become more effective, more equipped with the skills that are needed to navigate this era. Because we are seeing as well that in these moments of crisis, there's disinformation, misinformation, and different interests going on. And we really want to put, of course, the facts and the science at the forefront. But we also believe that the stories are very important because it's what resonates and connects with the people at the end of the day. So today we are going to be using specific case studies that are powerful examples of how climate reporting can directly support communities' preparedness and resilience. So we really believe that journalists are at the stakes of this, at the very center of everything that surrounds this reality that we are facing in this planet. And that's why we want to go beyond the statistics, and we want to empower communities, providing sometimes even life-saving information, or sometimes inspiring how to prevent different scenarios, no? And of course, encouraging action, no? Is what we need these days. As right now, for example, COP29 is happening, we wanted to offer this space more directed to media and journalism, but very important and relevant for other actors in society, because we, as we were saying, Resist aims to bring all of them together so the coordination is more effective. So with the program support, this project aims to make more tangible impact on these different regions, transfer it and replicate it in others that are in need, and basically help us to understand better what is the reality and navigate through it. So today's session, it's basically a step forward in that direction, equipping media professionals with resources, with examples of real-world insights and strategies that are needed to report on climate emergencies. So the first part of the session, it's going to be a panel discussion with David Latona from Thomson Reuters, correspondent. Hello, David. And we also have Aline Flor, a climate journalist from Publico in Portugal. So we have very good, invaluable insights on how they are tackling climate reporting to inform, mobilize, protect communities from these kind of natural disasters. Good morning and welcome, David and Aline.
Thanks.
Hello, Patricia. Hello, all.
Thank you so much for being here and offering your kind of insights, experience on these topics. And as I was saying, I would like to start by the example. So if you want to maybe each of you share a specific example of a coverage of a recent climate emergency that has had a meaningful impact, no, on affected communities, it will be very nice to build on those examples to understand how is the role of journalists, no, in these situations. So Aline, if you want to take the floor.
Yes, I can start. Well, again, thank you for the invitation. I hope we can be helpful for the people listening to this. In Portugal, for example, this year, the past months, we've had like two kinds of situations that are deeply impacted by climate change: droughts and forest fires. And I can focus on the forest fires because I also know that there are people watching this that perhaps are from these places. For example, in September we had like huge fires in the center of Portugal, in the Aveiro region, Albergaria Velha, that was impacted, like heavily impacted by the climate situation on the area, and still we had like dozens of houses that were affected. Also, like people who had to be moved from their places, and this is really the whole country was on alert. Also, because there was fires in other places because of the weather in that specific week. I would also mention, for example, the fires in Madeira, because there the weather situation is different, but the challenges in organizing the civil protection and the adaptation, this resilience thing, are similar to the other places, and we can draw like lessons from these different contexts where the extreme fires happen and to find out what we can do better. But I think we will have more time to explore like what we can do better. But I think the forest fires have been a big issue in Portugal, and I believe also in Spain, and all the Mediterranean we need to learn to deal better with that.
Thank you, Aline. And from your side, David?
Hi, and also thanks for the invitation again. Yeah, well, I think the most high-profile case that we've covered recently are the floods a few weeks ago in southeastern Spain that especially affected the Valencia region on the coast. And I mean, the impact of that is obviously very big in terms of death toll, in terms of destruction in general. We've seen, well, I mean, over 200 dead. It means it's the worst climate-related and weather-related disaster that Spain has seen in its modern history, probably. And in terms of impact, well, I mean, it's still ongoing. It's an ongoing story that we're still reporting on. We've been examining how the authorities have responded or failed to respond in some cases. That's one of the central elements that we're covering is what failed in terms of disaster preparation and in terms of crisis management. So I think there's still a lot that we will learn from all this. It's still ongoing. But yeah, we went there on the ground and talked to people affected directly by the catastrophe. And I think it's this the reporting that we've done has to combine not just the personal stories of people who've gone through this, but also obviously the scientific aspect and the data side of it. So we've worked hard to talk to experts who really know what their stuff. And I think one of the advantages of having the resources available that a big multinational company has, there are a lot of pros and cons, but one of the pros is that we are able to kind of fan out and touch on these different aspects. That it's not just reporting from a desk, but also being there on the ground. And yeah, we'll see how it evolves, but that's definitely, I think, the most recent example where a climate impacted event has really changed Spanish politics for a long time, I think.
Thank you, David. And based on this, for example, this example, how do you see the role of journalists evolving as climate emergencies intensifies, not only during the event, no, but before, during, and after, no? What will be that role?
David, do you want to keep going?
Yeah, well, I think in general, with the climate emergency that we're living, I think the role of not just specialized journalists like climate reporters or sustainability reporters or reporters who are specialized in renewable energy, we're definitely going to need more of those. We're going to need more reporters who are specialists, but also I think all reporters will have to get specific training in this area. And because it really affects every facet of daily life, right? Climate change is not something that's just reduced to the scientific field, but it's, I can think of colleagues. So for example, I've got a colleague who covers retail, the retail industry, so Inditex and all that. Right now, all the talk is about recyclable fibers and about sustainability and energy consumption during manufacture. Or I've got another colleague who covers banks. So with banks, it's also a big topic, ESG, governance, and sustainability, and greenwashing, which I think is very important for any journalist, also corporate journalist, to be able to identify, because a lot of companies obviously have a vested interest in presenting themselves as green. So I think in general, in the future, all of us are going to have to learn a lot more about how climate change is affecting everything and integrate it into our reporting. And for that, I think that we'll need to have a lot more scientific literacy in general, which is something that, it's not very clear how we can gain that as professionals, but I think, training opportunities in all aspects, also in academia, journalist schools and universities, we'll probably have to incorporate this into their programs. And yeah, I think that's the main thing, that we're all gonna have to learn more about climate change in general and specific impacts of it. And I only see that I think that's the only way we can really face this, is by learning a lot more.
Yes, I can say that as the world becomes more complex, also our work as journalists has also become a little more difficult and more complex. I would perhaps get back to the specific cases and to think about like how our role has been evolving, like this thing about that David was mentioning, like mainstreaming climate into other reporting, like local reporting, politics reporting is important because of how, for example, in Valencia, the floods, you saw how important it was to have like the media pressure on the political actors to act on science that was already known. And I remember in Madeira, the fire in August, it was also important because Madeira is also an autonomous region in Portugal. And if it was not for the pressure from both civil society, of course, but also the media, and trying to explain how important that super biodiverse forest was, the government wouldn't be so fast. I would also point like to the importance of local journalists to try to involve them in this, because sometimes in the newsrooms we have these silos, like the climate desk perhaps is a more sciencey desk, and sometimes the economic desk is more knowledgeable about transition. But then you do need local reporters to know what to ask for. And also one thing that it's humbling, it's that they too are very knowledgeable in some policy instruments that sometimes we climate journalists are not, like local policy, the territory ordainment. I'm not sure if it translates, ordenamento do território, well, for people. And so we do need to work together. I think for example, in the forest fires, it's usually the best coverage that we have in the newspaper is when we work together, that I can write and also tell my colleagues in the place, like, oh, look for this or look for that. And they also tell me, like, ask for this thing because it's missing here. So this is like articulation is essential. We need to collaborate more also inside the newsroom. And also Patricia was talking about, because of the project, about real world adaptation strategies. And well, politicians are not scientists. They do not have to follow word by word everything that that scientists tell them, but we as journalists can point that something is wrong in their in their actions. So it's also important to have this thing. It's also important that civil society and the scientists, the universities, and also feed us with this knowledge to be able to know. I always tell that the good thing, the journalist needs to know the good questions. And we only know the good questions if you know about the subject. And also this thing that also David mentioned actually in the previous question about focusing on the communities, the concrete stories, like having some more, like going deeper than just telling their stories, like knowing how to integrate those stories into the big picture. I think this is something that it will be very, very important. For example, for the droughts in Portugal, we have this. In Alentejo, we have immense effect on agriculture, and the people who are thinking about what they're going to do in the end of the month, of course, they are super worried about they don't have water for their crops, and it's important. But we also need to think about adaptation, like that region cannot sustainably keep growing that kind of crops. So it's very, very delicate to do this in the daily reporting, but we need to learn. I think this we are not still there at all, but to having more complex ways of telling people's stories. Like this is not, I'm not sure if I can do that right already, but we need to learn with each other also. Patricia.
Thank you so much for this comprehensive information that you are sharing. And it's linked with the next question that I have, which is like, how do we meet this challenge of balancing the news and emergency reporting with making the connection with the bigger picture, not the climate change? Because we know, working with these regions, that there is levels of skepticism around climate change, even in regions that are quite advanced, deploying solutions. But when we talk and we do surveys with the citizens, we realize that there is some disconnection with the climate change scenarios. And it's very hard, no? Sometimes the challenge of how do we connect the drought or suddenly a flood or the wildfire with that reality that will resonate with them, no? Which is something that Aline, you mentioned with this agriculture thing. Do you have any examples or kind of like ideas on how do we meet this challenge, no, of keeping the balance between these?
Can I go? I think one thing that it's also a challenge is that we have to talk about climate change not only when the impacts are super visible, because if we don't talk about climate change in the other time, it will not make so much sense when we mention it. Also, there's something about the science of how the impacts work. Like when you go to something called attribution studies, you know that it's not like this happened because of climate change. It's always like in Valencia, it's the thing, like it's a phenomena that happens often there, but not with this intensity, not so frequently. So we also need to learn we have to learn the vocabulary of also climate change and use it not only covering these events, but in every coverage that we do when things are not in extreme things. So this thing about the vocabulary is also not only about like how climate change, it's kind of an influence, like it infiltration in the events, but also the solutions. Like we talk about the not only mitigation, as David said, about the energy, but also adaptation. Adaptation is and I usually say that climate action is actually about caring for people, because it's about taking care of how they can keep their good lives in a world that is adapted to this changing weather. So, and knowing about adaptation, like knowing the vocabulary of adaptation, for example, climate disaster risk reduction, it's useful to be talking about this because these are policy instruments, and then people don't only listen about it only during the crisis. I think this is one of the main points. It's not we cannot just mention it during the crisis, and we cannot just mention it in science and climate news. We have to mention it in politics, like we are discussing the national budget in Portugal. And I mean, they talk about mobility, but they don't talk about climate action. They just go sector by sector. And that also doesn't help when we talk about more specific. David.
Yeah, that systemic perspective, no, of connecting the dots around all these different issues that are connected, and then we need to strengthen the coordination along this to avoid the silos. Yeah, and David, you wanted to contribute?
Yeah, I think Aline made some excellent points, and I completely agree. I think, as you said, it's not easy sometimes to make that connection in everyday reporting. Thankfully, I think we've left behind the days where mainstream media had this both siderism with in terms of climate change, where denialism was put at the same level basically as the scientific consensus. So I remember when I was growing up, there were times when you'd see a paragraph that said, well, you know, some scientists say climate change, man-made climate change is happening, but others aren't so sure. All these caveats, now we can dispense with them. We don't have to do that anymore. Now we can focus on, the scientific reality of this existential threat. And a specific example was the other day with the floods. On the day that the floods occurred, there was a lot of rain accumulating throughout the day. So we started off doing a story on the heavy rainfall and how, there were some places that were recording, I don't know, the same amount of rain that they would usually do on an average year, which already is obviously gets your attention. So yeah, we put together a story on these different measurements. I don't know, there were 400 millimeters of rain in this location, and the weather agency issued warnings and so on. But we were missing that crucial paragraph linking this to climate change to try to explain it. And so at first what I did was just look online and see how the phenomenon, in this case, what they call in Spanish, Latona, this cold drop phenomenon, how climate change has affected it and intensified its effects. And what I found was a bunch of papers, scientific papers, which are great. But when you're trying to condense these complicated concepts into simple language, sometimes they aren't your best friend, because obviously the language of academia is very different from that of journalism in general. So yeah, I was getting a bit irritated at how difficult it was to find like a simple explanation. So what I did in the end was just call up the state weather agency I met. They have very competent spokespeople who are meteorologists, so they're used to communicating these complicated ideas in a simple way. And I just asked them, I said, well, can you just explain in very, very, very simple terms what's the connection between global warming, or in this case, the warming of the Mediterranean Sea, and these intense rains. And yeah, that was great because he actually did it. He gave me like a 15-second summary where he said, well, the warming of the ocean means there's more atmospheric instability, and that in turn, so the whole mechanism was very simply laid out, and that really helped because then we were able to use that. So I think those kind of resources are always good because yeah, scientific papers are sometimes we don't have time to read all of them. So yeah, and like Aline mentioned, I think also focusing on solutions journalism is another area where I think we're doing more and more of it. And in those cases, the connection to climate change is usually laid out at the start because it's about finding solutions to problems created by the big main problem, which is climate change. So I think we're doing much more of that, and that's probably the way to go in the next few years.
Thank you, David. We have a question from Lilia, I think. So Lilia, feel free to take the floor.
Thank you for sharing your insights. My name is Lilia Bolonite Mural. I work at Simtev Digital, and I'm the Strategic Resist Coordinator. And my question is rather to challenge you on whether it is possible to strike a better balance between what is being shown in media to sometimes comparing what happens in the field, especially in the emergency situations. As one example, you spoke a lot about Valencia. Last week, I appeared to be in Malaga, which was just a week after Valencia, and I experienced a flood. It was just happening in front of the hotel I was staying, the big dam and water flood. And then the news that my family and friends communicated, they were far more dramatic compared to what I actually experienced being on the hotspot. So it is a question on when you communicate in these emergency situations, how do you consider this balance between the real field and between sometimes what is being brought up by different media channels? That's my question.
Perhaps I can give like a more general answer while you think about the specific situation, because I also had some friends that sometimes question me like, oh, this. I remember there was a storm coming to the United States like 1 month ago, and storm area, I'm not sure, but and I was with a friend that questioned like, oh, you made so much ado for nothing because then the storm didn't hit so hard, etc. But I do think that I mean, at least for me as a journalist, I know that sometimes it's we do have to have like deontological, ethical things about how we report on things. Sometimes, yes, some media do exaggerate some news because it's the style of journalists they do, and they have to rethink about that. But one thing that I think it's our role as journalists to do is also to raise awareness and bring the attention to problems that need to be solved. Like for as a public service, I need to I see situations going, and I want to put pressure on the public authorities to act. And sometimes it's also like this thing about, I remember like this example from the US about some storm that didn't happen as gravely as it happened. But the thing is that because it's the media sounded the alarm so loudly, the Florida state was more like prepared to the like little impact, like not little, but the not so heavy impact. So I think that we also have this thing that to this role of sounding the alarm for the authorities to act. And sometimes, of course, some media do have like sensationalist thing, they exaggerate, but I think it's important to also know about like the possibilities, like the potential that media has to bring change and bring action. So I'm not sure, David, how has worked in Valencia, and how did you balance these territorial differences?
Well, thanks for the question. And it's so first of all, I think the specific case of Malaga, which you mentioned, it's a great example of how this was affected by prior events. So the way that Malaga was handled in general by authorities, but also by the press, is completely different from what it would have been probably if Valencia hadn't happened a week earlier. So in that sense, we're always informed by these kind of things. We've had similar situations over the years here in Spain where we had weather warnings and heat waves, especially, for example, where, you know, we'd have to do the story on it, but usually the impact of those stories is pretty small because in the end, well, maybe the death toll isn't that high, or sometimes expected events like storms that you mentioned can be less damaging than maybe expected or predicted. So yeah, I think it's a better idea to err on the side of caution and like you said, raise the alarm a little bit for awareness. Also, I think that a lot of people simply aren't really or don't know exactly what to do in certain situations. And I think with the floods, that was very apparent because a lot of people tried to save their cars as their means of transportation to work. So one of the first things they did was go to their underground parking garages and try to get their car out. And that was in many cases what led to deaths, right? This idea that if they had known previously that that's the worst thing you can do in such a scenario, a lot of people probably wouldn't have taken that course of action. So I think when we talk about impending events that we think could have catastrophic consequences, it's always important to also include some information on how to act in these situations. Also, in terms of wildfires, there are a lot of a lot of basic tips to give to the population about what not to do and how to act. So I think, I think it's a lot better to be overly cautious than to just brush it off and be like, well, we'll see if something happens, and we don't really care until there are X number of dead. So that's obviously not the ethical approach in this case. And yeah, so again, I think just trying to put the focus on the basics of how to respond in such emergencies is much more useful than, you know, not wanting to worry anyone and having concerns about raising panic among the population. Obviously, we don't have to exaggerate. We don't have to be overly dramatic, but it's better to be cautious.
Yeah, definitely. There's a sense of urgency that we need to tackle now and stress, so people feel that this is real. And something that came to my mind related to, Aline, what you mentioned earlier, no, the need for not only covering these issues when the event happens, no, and the climate crisis happens, but at the same time, the feeling that I have is that it's very difficult to cut through the noise in daily newsrooms agendas to bring this topic to the mainstream, which is something that you mentioned. No, we need to bring climate change to the mainstream. We need to talk about this throughout the year. And why do you think that this is not so easy for us, especially working on solutions with these projects? It's very hard to really cut through, you know, all these newsrooms agendas to really put it at the front line and work on solutions journalism. No, how this trend could be amplified or mainstreamed.
I was thinking about the challenges for that, because usually when you're, I mean, ideally we could give like a super dense and contextualized news, but sometimes we are doing like day-to-day news, and it's not easy to make it super complete, actually, because sometimes news are just news and are not everything has to be like a reportage. But this to say that sometimes it's not for example, when we are talking about the ordenamento do território, like the all these kinds of policy documents could have a climate angle inside the news. One thing that David was saying, that it's actually it's very easy. You don't have to make every news like a climate, like in the title. Like it's just to understand the challenges. For example, with another topic like gender equality, I don't need to make every news about gender equality. But sometimes when I know some policy about family issues, I have to be aware that, for example, when we're talking about single-parent families, it's usually like most of them it's women. And when I talk about, you know, there are some policies that I know that gender has an impact. And in climate change, it's the same thing. Like all adaptation, like city planning, energy policies, they are all climate stories. We don't need to put climate in the title anymore, because they are just by definition right now. For example, one example, I mean, it's not easy to translate to newsrooms, but the AFP, the Agence France Presse, they created like the future hub, I think it's called like that. It's where they mingle like the energy journalists and climate journalists, so that when you talk about energy, you are also talking about climate. So I think that's how we mainstream the idea. Like it's having it in your mind, like it's like a lens that you have. You look at the topic and you know, okay, oh, this will have an impact. Like as I said, like climate adaptation it's about making everyone's lives like easier. So it's that's how I think it's interesting. Sometimes we talk about the climate fatigue, about how people are not. Like they are tired of listening, reading news about climate, and I would like to understand if it's like if we are really counting all the news about, because people do want to read the news about this the subsidy that they will have to buy a new car or a bicycle or something like that, or to have new windows in their homes. That's climate news too. And people are not fatigued of having a good life. So that's, I think that would be my...
Good. So we have a few questions from journalists in the audience that I would like to bring to your attention. So we have one from Matea Green, who is a journalist working at the Center for Investigative Journalism in the Adriatic region. And she mentions that she's hoping you touch on the problem of public response in Croatia, especially after COVID. People don't trust anyone. If the government issues a warning for dangerous weather, people will say they are making it up to take attention away from a corruption scandal. If journalists speak to meteorologists or other climate scientists, the public will say that someone paid off the scientists to create massive panic. If we report on a specific disaster, people say we are bringing a sensationalist and it's not such a big deal, so it's unrelated to climate change. So if we report on climate change as a general issue, nobody will read about it because they don't recognize when and how it will impact. No? So that's all the gaps and challenges that we have. I feel like nobody really cares about climate change, at least here. If there is still there's many deniers. How do we report on climate change to not only a disinterested but a hostile audience? So that's all about public response. I think you kind of answered throughout, but if David, you want to complement what Aline mentioned?
Yeah, I think those challenges that have been identified there are very real, and we deal with them all the time. Especially the part about part of the population that is hostile to any talk of climate and climate change. I think so. So one of the main things is, unfortunately, the concept of climate change is a little bit ideological. There's a lot of ideology involved, right? And so, for example, in Spain, the third largest party denies the reality of man-made climate change, anthropogenic climate change, and calls people who talk about it climate alarmists or fanatics, or talks about climate hysteria. That's something that's also, for example, we saw that in the U.S. election recently. It's straight out of the Donald Trump playbook of just saying, this is all blown up, exaggerated because there are vested interests and promoting the green agenda and so on and so on. So that's a big obstacle. I think one of the main things we can do as journalists is make the connection between denialism and real world consequences. How these ideologies influence public policy in terms of what gets cut during budget cuts, what priorities are given when producing budgets. And I think, for example, within the EU now, even in the European Parliament after the latest elections, the third largest bloc, basically is also more or less trending in that direction of denialism. So this will also inform EU policy, and EU regulations in the next few years will foreseeably be less green than the previous legislature. So yeah, if we identify what the impacts of denialism are, I think that will help a lot of readers see the direct connection, because sometimes it's all very abstract to them, I think, to the general public. So we need to focus, I think, a lot on specific examples, and again on solutions journalism, like we've mentioned before. Tangible things that people can actually see with their own eyes, instead of lofty abstract concepts. I think that's probably the main priority right now.
Yes, can I add something to? Yes, I think this thing about we talk about solutions journalism, but you can also talk about action-based stories, like telling stories about people doing, like trying things. And because usually it's not perfect, it won't be like we will learn a lot about the challenges, but we can show the people like what the first step can be to, because sometimes you just need to know like what's the first thing that I can do, and then have a big movement. One thing that I could add to what David was talking, it's about we also have to break this thing about thinking that politics is only about politicians and parties and government, because I think Spain is a very good example actually for a country where the civil society is very vocal when it's needed. But I would talk about and also like replying to the question about like Croatia. I'm not familiar with this more polarized and really, because for example in Portugal people are it's one of the European countries where people trust the news more, so it's difficult to talk about that. But I think one thing that is important in this, like if politicians are not trustworthy, like perhaps you have to be more make them accountable, but also to empower civil society, because if you do have actors in the civil society, in the organizations, in the movements that can be also empowered as political actors, like we don't have to make a partisan thing, like we can just try to make, okay, these people are doing things and we can also listen to them and bring them to our like, and not just a vox pop, because sometimes we also do that, like we go there, we have some quotes and then we go back and keep our way, but sometimes being more like keeping up with this, like also holding civil society accountable, because one thing that we learn when is that when people are held accountable, they usually step up to the challenge, and so we can do that. And also one thing that we can try to do is about this trust of science, because sometimes we think that scientists are just the ones who do the models and the math, and actually most of the scientists with which I am in contact sometimes are the ones who are in the field doing the like concrete projects with communities, and they know people, they don't just know theory. And I think that we can also help, like showing this, as David said, like part of the solution stories are also science stories, because you do have very, very, very good contact between scientists and population, so that we can also try to bring those actors that like to flip the script on the things that people usually think about scientists and the civil society and what is politics. Perhaps we need to learn new ways of building democracy. So yes.
Thank you, Aline. We have 3 more questions in the Q&A, which I would love to bring. Aline, maybe following on what you were saying, there's one question for you. Since you spoke about the need to learn about more complex ways of telling stories about climate change and people, and we have to learn together, in communication there is expertise to explain systems challenges in a compelling way. Will it be helpful to bring these 2 worlds together?
Yes, I'm not sure if I know the specifics of that proposition, and I do think that we need to learn, but we also need to I'm not sure how we are if journalism in the way we do it is ready for that, because the thing about like it's interesting because we have for some years focused a lot on slow journalism and investigative reporting, and this is super important, of course, but you also need like good daily news journalism. And the thing about daily news is that they are usually like we need to be able to write short things, because people will only read like the first 3 paragraphs and not so yes, we perhaps we keep adding things to the curricula in the universities, but yes, trying to bring that, but also like I'm not sure what is the limit of what we can ask of journalism in the way we make it, because also like the video probably thinks about this also, because agency news are almost per definition short news. So perhaps you can also help a little. How is your like, because I have like all the writing for online publication, like Azul. I have all the space that I can stretch the text. But how, David, how is your experience of bringing?
Well, yes, the word count is a very big limitation. unfortunately, sometimes we really struggle with it. And yeah, for when we have very limited space, again, the challenge is to be as concise as possible and get it into one paragraph, try to get the climate angle in there. But I also think that not everybody learns the same way, and not every reader acts the same. Not everyone wants to read a 2,000-word article. I mean, I usually do. I enjoy those, but a lot of people don't, and attention spans, as we all know, are notoriously getting shorter and shorter. But there are other ways to present information that, doesn't always have to be a long text. I think nowadays, thanks to the internet, there's a lot of interactive reporting that's being done that's really nice. A lot of maps that you can play around with, graphs and charts that are multimedia, interactive, and so on. Obviously, mediums such as television are now more YouTube and TikTok, but visually presenting information can be done in a way that's not always limited by text, which is a limited medium in itself. So I think the more we integrate this kind of reporting, visual, graphics, and multimedia and interactive information presented very visually, that really helps. And we can do it with macro and systemic things like global warming, or we can, there are ways to talk about ocean pollution, for example, that don't necessarily have to write a super long essay on how marine life is affected by pollutants. I think you can visually present it in very interesting ways. So I think this is going to be more common, I think, also with the new younger journalists they're coming out of universities right now. I think a lot of them have the technical expertise to do this, and that's good news for everyone, I think.
Yes, but I can add that also this need for complexity coexists with a very dire situation for the media. And I was thinking about because to do some, you need time and you need resources to do some of these things. Like as David said, that it's people are coming from the universities with very wide knowledge of multimedia, so it's really good to have these people who are thinking in multiple formats. But the thing is that they are super time consuming, and if you don't have a big team, you will need a lot of time to do these things. So it's a balance that it's hard to also achieve in newsrooms. Like we sometimes actually know like these recipes, but we have to make choices like if we do this, perhaps we won't be able to send someone to the field, like to do the reporting in the place. So what do we prefer? To have like a cool infographic, or to have like a amazing first-hand reporting about the situation? So I think it comes back to what David said, that it's about being prepared, like to do the homework, because when we do the homework, we usually are more prepared to do the work in a fast pace a little better.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Thank you for these answers. And we have 3 questions that are somehow related and that you already touched on them, but maybe we can bring them in case you want to complement or add any points. We have a comment from Alessia Pietrosanti. She is the project advisor at the European Commission THINEA program. And she says that thank you for the great insights on climate news reporting. And working on adaptation to climate change, I think it will be important to report on measures which work and prevent damages and loss of human lives to happen. Of course, if an extreme climate event happens and no significant consequences are experienced, for the news-making industry, nothing has happened, no news to report. So how positive stories can make it to the news coverage, which is related to other question that we have, like what role could play solutions journalism in reporting on this? Any answers to this?
Well, I mean, yeah, we we do need, as we've said repeatedly, we do need more solutions reporting, which also requires resources. And it can be very interesting reporting and very satisfying, but I think it also has there are some problems sometimes that we face when doing this. You know, we don't want to inadvertently give free advertising to certain scams that occur. So there's a big part of solutions journalism that I think is questioning uh, a lot of different factors, but I think, you know, having a look at the technology that's presented, seeing, you know, asking yourself whether it's new or if it's old technology, who paid for the development of that technology, that kind of stuff, or the motivation behind the people presenting the solution. If again, if they're trying to use the media as free PR, let's say, or if there's a genuine attempt at providing a solution to a climate-induced problem. You know, looking at any unintended consequences that there might be to the solution. Sometimes solutions can be good for a very specific thing, but you know, unintentionally have an impact in other ways. Thinking whether something is scalable or if it's just a drop in a bucket. So those kind of caveats and precautions when reporting on solutions journalism, I think are still very important. Because we don't want to just be a marketing agency for any startup that says it's gonna revert climate change because it has this specific technology. So while we do more of these stories, we also have to have a very high bar when it comes to journalistic standards and questioning every aspect of solutions journalism. And sometimes it can be great. So I did a story once about hydroponic farming of hops for beer, which was great. It was a lot of fun and really interesting. But it took, I think, like 4 or 5 months to get through because editors were very skeptical about a lot of the propositions. So we had to contrast everything with independent scientists. And I mean, this is basic journalism in general, but I think we have to be extra careful with solutions journalism.
Okay, we have one last question before we jump into the other part, and that could go for you, Aline. And you can complement what David said. So Vera Peneda from European Journalism Center.
Hello, Vera.
Interesting food for thought and also some questions for you. So are Publico and Reuters collaborating with content creators online to report on climate change? My questions come from the sense that legacy media is not yet finding audiences where they are. People, in particular young audiences, turn to social media for the news in a space where they end up being vulnerable to misinformation and disinformation. And the collaboration with content creators could help reach younger audiences and elevate public service journalism on social media. The question is perhaps more for you, Aline, but it will be great if David can also answer from the perspective of an agency, if this type of collaboration is something they could consider doing.
Yes, I think definitely yes. In Publico we have, for example, P3 is a desk for like a vertical, let's say, as we say, for young people, and they think about that even more than Azul. But we also think about how we could make these collaborations. But again, it's sometimes a matter of resources, because building communities and reaching out is like another work besides just reporting. Like actually, for example, like 40 years ago, being a journalist in a newspaper, just had to write it down and just deliver. Right now I have to write, and then I have to put the links. I know the news that are more important, so I go find the related news for that. So I have to also be more involved in this, like, dressing of the news, and reaching out to the public is another thing that has to be done. And actually, like newspapers like Publico, we do have like a social media team that is also very small, for the like 3 people for the whole newspaper. And they do try to do these things, but it's something that also needs to be embedded. So everything that needs to be embedded, like mainstreamed in the work, takes time and thinking. And of course, this is something that we think about, but we are not like doing this like structurally, let's say, yet. But I hope that we do more. Just one thing that just to comment on David about solutions to journalism, I can say that actually I'm starting a fellowship also with the Solutions Journalism Network and the European Journalism Center with about solutions journalism to do like a reporting. And the thing that's about the name is sometimes misleading because it's not always about solutions. It's about doers. Like they're not always like the heroes or there are some just people doing things, and we try to understand how they do it and what works. And this is something like the solutions we cover are sometimes not like scalable, as David said. They are not like perfect for everything, but actually we know that the like climate solutions will be like a huge puzzle. It won't be like a one size fits all. So we also need to learn. And one thing that I noticed that the person that made the question was from the Commission, and I have some some things for the institutions, because one thing that sometimes I miss is to have, for example, I learned about projects that are starting, but not about their ending. I have no reports on how it works, and so I also don't know. Like I know about there's few resources that I can use to follow what's happening. So sometimes I don't cover a story because it would take a long time to prepare that thing, to decide if I will tell that story or not. So that's something that sometimes it's missing, because people are sometimes afraid to accept journalists reporting on something that is incomplete or not perfect. And perhaps also as a society, we need to learn to embrace this complexity. Like we are not losers if we fail in one thing, and because we need to celebrate the wins and not just focus on like I wish like people would open more doors to journalists to enter, to learn about the processes and not just the victories. Because I mean, society is not just made of heroes and victors. It's normal people who sometimes fail, sometimes win, and we are all in our processes. And I think institutions could help us also tell stories of learning and process, and not just of wins. So I think that would be my take on also the solutions to journalism and the concrete approach, that we show that the world is many colors, not just black and white.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with the call to better communication from institutions, be it the European Commission or any other one. I think that's certainly needed. And going back to the original question about content creators, I think that's a very intriguing proposition. I think maybe for as news agencies, the business model is different, obviously, from others that depend more on ad revenue or sales of newspapers, for example. In our case, I think social media probably isn't that big of a factor compared to clients and client subscriptions, just because of the way it works, the business model. But still, there's still a gap between legacy media and the way that that youths or younger people consume news. Not only younger people nowadays, but that gap has to be bridged somehow, I think. And the lines will be blurred probably in the near future. There won't be this strict differentiation between serious media and then social media. I'm not sure about partnering with specific content creators because, well, they're not always beholden to the same rules that journalists are. Like anyone can be a content creator, and I've seen some that are a bit dodgy. So you know, if you want to keep the high standards, you have to figure out a method where to ensure that you won't just give a platform to anyone saying anything. You have to be.
It's funny, David, because it's the same thing that we advocate for, like the people open the doors to journalists, but actually perhaps we need to learn to communicate with these other communicators and to accept they won't be perfect. Nobody's perfect, but they don't have, but to try to find common ground and not just leaving them aside just because we are afraid that they won't be so good, because actually that's what people think about some journalists, like they won't be representing us well. So it's perhaps we also have to do the learning.
Yeah, it's very hard to balance. We don't want to be gatekeepers, and as I said, we want to be more participatory. But again, if it's the format of communicating, which is basically one person talking to the camera. Nowadays, that's been very democratized. Anyone who has a phone can do it. And how we, as media outlets, how we interact with them is important. I mean, a lot of our news comes from social media right now. Like a lot of the stuff that we write about is something that happened on Twitter, formerly known as Twitter, and I think we're still struggling to know how to interact with these new emerging digital formats. It's interesting. I think it could be a good idea to try to blur those lines a bit more, but I'm not sure how that would look like in terms of it's still very new, I think. So I don't have a specific answer.
Yeah, not an easy question, but definitely food for thought and something to keep exploring collaborations and how to strengthen this. Thank you so much both for all your insights, because I think it's been very interesting. And we will continue now with a short interactive session led by Marta, Castillo, and Boris van Westering, a climate journalism expert. And of course, you can keep interacting and participating with the audience. So I'll give you the floor so you can take us through.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you, everyone. It was definitely a very interesting conversation now. I will have stayed longer to listen to you. So as Patricia said, we will do like a actually quite short interactive session now. Also to hear from you that are there on the other side, so the attendees. But first of all, I will give the floor a few minutes to Boris, so he will do a quick brief introduction, and then we jump in.
Well, thank you, Marta, and I must say that I have to thank also David and Aline and Patricia for the very exciting conversation actually that we had on the sharing of their experiences here, and it's a great opportunity to be here during also the COP29, being also live streamed at the We Don't Have Time platform worldwide, and I think. We are talking now in connection to European challenges, right, in newsrooms. And I hope that we can actually open up the conversation also to broaden the conversation to a more of a global conversation of what can we learn from each other and how can we bring the different dots together. And that actually also motivated me to reach out to you guys, also from Resist and Revolve, and also with the European Journalism Center, to actually dive a bit deeper. Like, how can we have now seen the testimonies of David and Aline also on what are individual challenges as journalists in connection to the newsroom, but also we have to look more strategically, right? It's like, how can media and newsrooms become more strategic in a world where we will have to deal with much more of these climate emergencies and that are very much life-threatening, and how can we make the bridge between first responders and scientists to make it better. And actually I've tried to look, Marta, if you allow me to make a little trip to around the world. It's like we have had some different experiences also in the past, and what can we actually learn from these evaluations? And so, for example, the evaluations that we had also in my country where I live in the Netherlands is in 2021 we had a flood that was devastating, and also in Germany and Belgium at the time, and there were some evaluations done after the crisis, and we and there Deltares and the Vrije Universiteit van Amsterdam, they came to an evaluation that's saying, like, we need really to put on more emphasis on increasing risk awareness among citizens, so that they can be better prepared for floods, and that can actually save lives and reduce damages. So there's a clear message there also to the media, that to become part of this information provision make the bridge to communication about how to become prepared and resilient. And not only in Limburg or in the Netherlands, Pakistan had equally a very devastating flood not too long ago in 2022, and multiple evaluations have been done there as well on what the role was of the media, and there they found out it was always too little too late. The media was focusing on the political dimensions of the government and making a lot of problems and unrest, more sensationalistic kind of reporting, rather than to focus on local and mostly vulnerable communities. Media didn't have access to. I'm not sure how David and Aline can say, like, how about access to the crisis area. Like, how can you have access to crisis areas, and how can media actually learn from it to get better access in the future? And in the end, the most vulnerable people, the most vulnerable communities, are mostly left out in media coverage. So, look, how can you make tailored information that reach those audiences that are maybe not on your platform, and by making use of social media and so on, and to reach and include those communities in your reporting. So actually, Media Matters for Democracy, based in Pakistan, they came with some kind of study and made these recommendations, and actually recommendations that can be applied, I think, also here in Europe. And so it's about capacity building of journalists and how to better inform the public on climate emergencies, and maybe also collaborate with disaster management institutions and newsrooms to have when the shit hits the fan, that you are able to find each other in a more closer way. Fact checking and debunking disinformation, that's hugely needed, and again, we need to tell different ways of storytelling, and we saw already solution-based journalism and other techniques, but I think these kind of innovative storytelling can actually help us all. And build a community on which is a global. So I hope, Marta, that we can also invite journalists and others in the audience that come from different regions to add, and maybe also open up the chat and to have a conversation. What can be done to actually foster reporting on climate emergencies. So Marta, take it away.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you, Boris, for the introduction. As you might have seen already in the chat, we shared a message with a link to a mural. So as Boris was saying, and that's what we also envision for this session, is that it's also a first stepping stone to have this community gathering as well, and create a bit of a conversation and a space for journalists, but not only journalists, because I know we have other people in the audience that are not journalists, but they work in these emergency situations related to climate change. So it's important to put us also all together. So we prepared this mural that you can follow the link and go into it. And we added 2 questions. So mainly, what challenges have you encountered when covering climate emergencies? And we want to hear from you, what have been your main barriers, let's say. So we also can think of upcoming sessions or like how to support also this community of journalists moving forward, and also what resources or support you think are essential for newsrooms to cover these stories. And here, as I said, like it can be not only newsrooms, it can be also if you're a CV protection, part of a CV protection unit, and you have to communicate with the media. So how would, like, which tools and what would help you to increase the communication with the media and having like a better impact of this communication. So the mural is open. You can add your ideas there. We will gather it all later on, and I might pick some ideas now. But as we don't have that much time, we also wanted to open a bit the conversation. So if you are in the mural, but you want to highlight some of the comments or some of the ideas that you have right now after hearing the conversation with David and Aline and seeing these questions in the mural, you are, free to speak up. So you can raise your hand, and I will open the mic for you. So we also want to hear your voices, and you can also feel free to share here in the chat. So lots of interaction. But yeah, basically, if you can drop like one idea on each of the questions in the mural, and then if you feel like sharing here out loud and like sharing a few ideas or like a broader comment with the community and with the people here, that would be lovely. So we also hear your voice even if we cannot see you. But for now, I will check what is being added on the mural, but I think there are some ideas being added there. If you have, well, I hope everyone can enter, but if not, you can also drop message here in the chat, which you could, you should all be able to access the chat and right there. So if you have any issues there. So in the mural, I see Boris, that we have as the main, one of the main barriers is that editors do not want to cover climate change topics because they are not clickable, or because the public don't trust them, or because it's trust in government and journalism is very low. So that's one of the barriers that have been highlighted here. I see some other people typing, but no ideas have come yet. And as resources, well, solutions-oriented communication, so that came up again. I see there's a lot of willingness for solutions and for positive news, that we see it as a way forward. Resources, so information available in the European Commission repository. So that also goes in line with one of the comments that there was before, and also the comment from Aline, like also learning from beginning to end, what's the impact of all this project, like Resist. So we know that this project started, we know what's happening, but we also need to communicate and to see what's the final impact. So some questions and comments are coming in here in the chat. As I said, if you want to talk, I will be more than happy to hear some of your voices. So you can raise your hand your list of participants, or below you have the option of raise your hand, and you can talk. Ligia, if you want, we can open the mic to you. Okay, so Christina, no worries. You can share the ideas here, or you can even share it out loud. So I will allow you to talk if you want. And Ligas, yes?
I think the general problem, hello,
Hello.
is, like Aline said very well, is that climate doesn't sell. And newspapers, if they're online, it doesn't sell because it has, in my opinion, the solution journalism to show the stories like we used to do in general in a balanced way started a little bit too late, maybe because the climate issue was denied. And so also the solutions were denied. It's just logical. If you don't talk about something which you can only see in the extreme peaks, like now in Valencia, for example, and then you have always these catastrophic results, it only sells in that moment. And the solutions are something which is developed in general of the actions people take to deal with climate change in the long term. And it doesn't sell as good as the usual economical content, because most editors, in my experience at least in the long term, took climate issues as technical issues or economical issues, and not so focused on the people's side.
Yeah,
I don't know if the others have the same opinion. It's just my idea about it. Thank you.
But can I ask you in response to your remark, is that does the media have a good understanding of what the audience information needs are in times of crisis? Because in the end, people want to be prepared and want to be informed, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that takes, in particular, well, I used to work as a freelance long shot feature journalist, where I had a month to work on stories on renewables, for example. I had really time to talk with experts, with scientists if needed, and even if there were conflicting opinions, we could deal with that and put that into stories. And I have the impression that this is getting lost in general. And the media is trying to catch up. But the topic is very complicated. Here in Germany, for example, there are now books they're selling, the 30 most important things on climate change, for example. And then you have in these books, have a chart explaining, for example, heat waves, how they are generated. And it's very basic. And in the I think in 10 years, this might change, because in school, the teachers are catching up and giving much more information. So the pupils are asking more. But in this moment, we have a conflicting situation, and it comes from not dealing with all these amount of informations. Yeah, it's not a fast topic. That's what I mean.
We had also Vera that raised her hand. So your mic is open, Vera, if you want to share.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Good morning. Thank you for the introduction, Marta and Boris. So I wrote a little bit in the chat, right? I am no longer a journalist, but I was for many years. So I think I am more critical in this matter of the media, let's say. I hear often that people don't want to consume climate news, or climate doesn't sell, right? But I think perhaps we have to switch the way we are looking at this situation, and it's the media and journalists that need to revise our approach and adapt to reach out to where the audiences are and to report in the formats that they engage with, right? I see good examples of this. And one is, for example, Deutsche Welle, who has a channel on YouTube. It's called Planet A. They do a lot of solutions-oriented or action-based journalism, let's call it, like Aline mentioned before, right? And it really resonates with audiences. And one of the strategies they found to do this is to not include the word climate in their headlines. It's funny, right? But so perhaps they also identified a little bit of what Christina was saying, that people for some reason are not engaging as much, even though they seem to be concerned about a topic. They're not engaging with the news. They changed the approach and they decided, okay, let's work on headlines that do not use the word climate, but somehow in the content, in the story, then the climate implications are very much explained and put into context. So it's a possible approach to see if it works. I think that the media is still finding ways to do this, right? We are all learning, and so we have to try different approaches. Yeah, and this is perhaps one.
Very insightful, Vera. I think many of these questions already came up in the conversation with Aline and David, but definitely, of course, yeah.
There's also a question in the chat, Marta. It's about, I think, the challenge of getting access to data and evidence in relation to loss and damage. This is particularly a question from Rashad from Bangladesh. Also, this question basically goes to, like, where can I get reliable data and the data search, and are there maybe also tips and tricks available for getting these data available? And maybe to my understanding, data is a big issue. And Rashad, I do not know the context of Bangladesh, but I will note down your email address and I will come back to you. And basically, this question is also about how can we make sure that a newsroom has easy access to reliable sources, and how can we build a bridge between these data sets and help each other in a community setting of helping each other out in the validated data and fact-check data that can be used either from a specific country context or maybe from a global dynamic.
Yeah, I think here it's also important to highlight what David, the example of David that he explained earlier in his intervention, like having your own credible sources that you can reach out to when there is I don't know, like an extreme weather event that you need to cover. So to have already your pool of sources, that's an important thing to have. Yeah. And yeah, I think there is another comment. Well, yes, reflections from Alessia. Repository of success cases and tools. So, for example, the resources from the European Environment Agency, which can be very valuable for journalists working in Europe, and making this climate connection. I had seen another hand raised before, but it disappeared. I don't know if someone else wanted to intervene. I see here David. Yes, David, you can go ahead if you want.
It's a very interesting point raised by Rashad too, and I think maybe it's something that we haven't stressed enough, but we do need better tools in general, and that also applies to the data that we get. Obviously, most data comes from official institutions, from state bodies and governmental agencies, but it's usually very scattered. And there are some tools that have made our life a lot easier, like the Copernicus satellite system to track wildfire damages. That's extremely useful, but we need more of that also for floods and other extreme climate events. But what I wanted to just very quickly highlight is just the finding experts. That's another big difficulty in general. You go on a university website and look at the professors and try out their emails and send them emails and see what happens. But it would be very useful to have directories where, certified experts, let's say, are easily available and, with phone numbers and ease of access. Because a lot of time we just spend a lot of time just looking for someone who can tell us about the nitty-gritty. So I think it's that challenge of having, another thing that happens often is that we rely on the same experts over and over again, and that's also not ideal. So we know we have our contacts and we always call them for the same kind of stories, which obviously reduces the diversity of voices that are being platformed. And it can also lead us into traps where, we can get a little bit lazy maybe, because we know that we can always rely on this professor from this university. So I think it's important to have a very ample, very large list of people that we can talk to provide better coverage in general.
Thank you, David. Muchas gracias.
I think also your comment, David, I tested this comment also with Deltares, who did the evaluation on the flooding. And they actually said, yeah, our problem with the media is every time we get another journalist that comes and asks us the same questions. So there seems to be not an accumulated knowledge within the organization of the media related to a specific flood, which happens all the time. In the case of Limburg, the only climate disaster that can happen is a flooding. So if you are a media outlet that have a large audience, a public that lives there, your news organization needs to know more and have in-house expertise, built-in in-house expertise on the specific topic, so that you actually, and that's what his question, his remark was, that you actually are able to ask deeper questions, and that you have that you can actually bring the reporting on a different layer, and maybe also translate it in more, and help to have the discussion together on how can we make this knowledge more accessible to people that are younger and need to have this information through social media, for example. He said social media strategies would work as well because they are life-saving at moment of crisis. And the final remark he made, and which was very interesting, is there's a lot of crisis response training that has been done between local communities and governments and first responders, and journalists are often not invited at such emergency training. So he said that would be quite useful actually if a media outlet, if they are part of the crisis information system ecosystem, they need to be at the table as well and claim a spot more prominently in crisis response. So that is an observation that I actually also quite liked. And Marta, back to you.
Yes, that's a good. I mean, we need to wrap it up because we've already been 5 minutes longer than we were expecting. But the conversation is very interesting. But I think that last point you made, Boris, it's a good wrap up. Also for Resist as a project that works on these topics. So, but I will pass it back to Patricia to wrap up the session. I hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you, Marta, for this short discussion. I think there's a lot to be discussed because it's a very important topic these days, and definitely the role of media, it's a key in this discussion. So, well, thank you all for making this possible today, David, Aline, Vilia, Boris, Marta, and for all the participants who were active and engaged during this session today. Well, just in reference to what we were discussing about the resources or references, at Resist we have put together a little toolkit, what we call the Media Insights Toolkit, that brings together a compilation of credible sources where you can find information about these topics that we have discussed today, about both climate journalism, but also about the data, where to find it and how to report more effectively on this. So everyone that has registered to the event will receive this toolkit in their inbox in the next days. So you can keep exploring, keep reading, and please get in touch with us if you have any story, any a story that you would like to share with us, because we would like to do that, no? To look it from a systemic perspective with the lens of climate in everything that we do, and looking, of course, at the actions and solutions that are happening, so it can give us hope and inspiration to apply it in other places. So thank you for being here, and keep in touch through Resist, of course. We will be doing more media briefings. Every 6 months we host this space for us to get together and discuss around different themes that we feel that are important in the field of climate journalism. So keep following us, and see you soon then. Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good day.
Bye, you too. Good one.